Today, it looks like the GPU market is even worse than I thought. Intel's 14th gen CPUs bring a third core. This is AMD's new 7600, benchmarks leak for AMD and Nvidia's next GPUs, and Intel's about to change PCs forever. But first, really quickly, like I said, I'm going to be going over the RX 7600 and RTX 4060 Ti. I will have affiliate links for those in the description below for when they're released. It doesn't cost you anything more, and it helps the channel out. Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. First up for today, I've been following quite a few stories that show GPU prices are lowering seemingly across the board and in tons of countries. The thing is that while I was sure things were not going all that great for GPU manufacturers like AMD and Nvidia, I didn't think it was this bad. As you can see right here from Digital Trends, it says Nvidia ditches the RTX 4070. And of course, the 4070 is that GPU that really didn't get all that much praise. It was the successor to the 3070, and it was a bit faster, but it more or less just traded blows with the 3080. The thing is that when it compares to the 4070 Ti, you can see that it's a pretty big downgrade. It does come with 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X, just like the 4070 Ti, but it has a lot fewer CUDA cores. Well, as you can see right here, it says just as the 4060 family of GPUs are being launched, a new report says Nvidia may be freezing production of the RTX 4070. Apparently, sales of the card are so bad that the company has halted production in a desperate bid to turn things around. And of course, this is right before the 4060 series of GPUs first launches, or at least the 8GB 4060 Ti that's coming at the end of this month, actually just in a couple days, as well as a 16GB model and of course the regular 4060. According to this story, the production halt is set to last until June. Now, obviously, this model right here is coming out in July, but this could just sort of give them like the amount of cards that they feel they need where they aren't going to have an excess when the 4000 series is essentially done. Either way, if the card was selling extremely well, this wouldn't be a thing regardless, so it apparently is not. And next up for today, we have a really interesting story about Intel's next-gen CPUs. As you can see right here in a new story from Tom's Hardware, they actually cover a new benchmark for their upcoming 14th gen series of CPUs. But the benchmark itself isn't really the interesting part. What's actually interesting starts here. It says Intel continues to go down the hybrid path with Meteor Lake, which features a multi-tile design, will employ Redwood Cove performance cores to handle heavy workloads, while saving the Crestmont efficient cores for simpler tasks. But right here is where it says it. However, Meteor Lake may feature a third type of core presently rumored as the LPE core, or low power efficient cores. They expand on this a little bit further down here. Meteor Lake has 4 tiles: graphics, SoC, GPU, and IOE. The LPE core resides in the SoC tile. Think of AMD's Ryzen IO die. But unlike the IO die, apparently Meteor Lake supports low power island CPU offload, meaning that the job of the new cores is to effectively handle background processes when it's idle or in sleep mode. This would obviously help power consumption tremendously and could be something very interesting for things like laptops. Either way, as you can see down here, it says the first Meteor Lake sample emerged with 14 cores that likely adhere to the 4P plus 8E design. Now, if you're even semi-okay with math, you can see that that equals 12 cores. Well, that's because they're looking at 14 cores, those remaining 2 being the LPE cores. There was also a sample of a 16 core model that they believe has a 6 performance core and 8 efficiency core, so obviously still 2 remaining there as well. And next up for today, we have a very interesting leak from Video Cards, who look to have shared the reference design of AMD's upcoming Radeon RX 7600 GPU. Of course, we've been covering this GPU for a little while now, but it looks like we actually have a reference design. And of course, it's almost always a toss-up as to whether there's going to be a reference design for the mid to low end GPUs, but apparently for the 7600 there is. And as you can see, it's pretty tiny. This is a dual fan shroud, and it definitely looks very similar to their 7900 XT and XTX, but obviously with 2 fans instead of 3. Then we can see right here the backplate Fairly simple design, once again, very similar to their higher end model, but just smaller, shorter, all of that good stuff. As you can see right here, it's apparently shorter than 21 centimeters. Moving on, we have some of our first benchmarks of the RX 7600 as well as the RTX 4060 Ti. As you can see down here, according to Video Cards, really quickly, he states that these benchmarks were collected from multiple reviewers and the data was averaged. What that means is that this is likely set to be very close to the final performance, so this leak is definitely really interesting. Either way, starting things off in Time Spy, the Radeon RX 7600 gets 10,687, while the 4060 Ti gets 13,395. Time Spy Extreme, the 4070 Ti has 6,287, while the 7600 has 5,079. Then in Speedway, the 7600 gets 1,949, while the 4060 Ti gets 3,176. Now, obviously, as you can see, it's pretty clear that the 4060 Ti beats out the 7600 by quite a bit. Not too much, but I mean, it's definitely a step above, but that really isn't a big surprise given the 6600 was more made to go against the 3060, not the 3060 Ti, so I'm assuming that's going to be the same for the 7600. When compared to last gen GPUs, the 7600 is a little bit of a jump over the 6650 XT, but quite a bit of a jump over the regular 6600, which is obviously the thing it's replacing. The 4060 Ti, on the other hand, is only a slight jump over the 3060 Ti, so it definitely looks like AMD has the really big jump here. Moving down to Firestrike, we actually see that things get much closer. Don't forget that Firestrike is DX11. Either way, the 7600 got 33,925 in regular Firestrike, while the 4060 Ti got 33,596. Obviously, the 4060 Ti still wins here, but not by much. Then in Firestrike Extreme, we have 15,873 for the 4060 Ti and 14,571. So once again, really close here, and it gets even closer with Firestrike Ultra. The 7600 comes in at 7,126, while the 4060 Ti gets 7,357. Of course, we know the 4060 Ti is set to come in at $400, but as of now, we don't have an announcement of the 7600, so we don't have a number for what this costs, but it should be cheaper, obviously, than the 4060 Ti, but of course, we shall see. And lastly for today, we have a really interesting story from Tech Power Up regarding a white paper that Intel recently did. As you can see down here, Intel published a highly involved and extensive white paper on the topic of streamlining its CPU architecture, most notably by focusing on a purely 64-bit specification. Basically, they would be dropping legacy support for 32-bit as well as 16-bit modes. And it's pretty much assumed that they release this white paper to kind of gauge what everyone thinks about it before they actually did something like this. But essentially, CPUs that are released even to this day, pretty much all of them support 32-bit and at least in some ways 16-bit modes. But obviously not many people use 32-bit operating systems or 32-bit applications, and certainly not 16-bit, though of course there are going to be businesses with very old systems, things like that, where it would cost tons of money to completely change the system out. They are likely on these older operating systems, but for the average user, pretty much entirely, everything's moved to 64-bit. As you can see down here, it states even Microsoft stopped shipping the 32-bit version of their Windows 11 operating system, proving just how few people really need or want 32-bit versions of OSs. Either way, what's really interesting about this is the fact that it would allow Intel to effectively get rid of certain things on their CPUs. You can see right here, these are architectural changes. They can remove the 32-bit ring 0, removal of ring 1 and ring 2. So these are effectively parts on the CPU that are used specifically for 32-bit operating systems, applications, all of that good stuff. So this would effectively allow Intel to remove that from the silicon and put something else there instead. Intel is actually calling this new architecture x86S. And obviously, if they're able to remove certain amount of transistors and put other ones there, it could make CPUs faster, though I don't really think they're using all that much silicon space for that. The really interesting part comes when you boot your system. As you can see right here by this diagram, currently you effectively have to go through a bunch of modes before your computer actually turns on 64-bit mode and the operating system is able to load. With this, it would skip all of those steps and just go right to 64-bit mode. This is obviously interesting because it could mean that we could have our PCs up and running significantly faster when we press power. CPUs could get faster. Unfortunately, it's not really clear just how much faster they could get. It may be quite a bit. It may load significantly faster when you turn it on, but obviously this is a really big step. Now, according to Intel, even if you do still rely on 32-bit operating systems or applications, you can apparently use virtualization to boot into a 32-bit OS. So I don't really think this is that bad of a thing as far as for people who are still on 32-bit applications, though obviously it would be an adjustment, but it's definitely a really big move by Intel. So while that does it for today, once again, was this a good move by Intel? What do you think? And what do you think about the 4060 Ti and RX 7600? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. And as always, have a great day.